The story of St. Christopher begins shrouded in mystery and devotion. His true name was Reprobus, and he lived between the 3rd and 4th centuries, a time marked by the persecution of Christians. From the earliest accounts, his figure impressed by his unusual strength and stature, which made him known as a true giant. He was originally from the region of Canaan, according to some Eastern traditions, and was born into a pagan family. Reprobus was a man of immense strength, and his imposing appearance drew attention wherever he went. He had a sincere desire to serve the most powerful of lords, and so he spent much of his youth seeking the one he considered to be the strongest and most feared among men. Initially, he placed himself at the service of a mighty and cruel earthly king, believing this to be the supreme lord. Over time, Reprobus realized that the king he served feared the devil. This discovery intrigued him deeply, for if that monarch feared another force, then that force must have been even more powerful. With this thought, he decided to abandon the king and seek the devil to serve him. Believing he had now found the true Lord of all power, Reprobus then met a man who claimed to be a servant of the devil, and after some demonstrations of power, decided to follow him. But the illusion was short-lived. On one occasion, as they passed by a cross, the supposed devil was filled with fear and changed his path. Intrigued, Reprobus asked the reason for that fear and was told by the man that he feared the crucified Christ. Once again, Reprobus understood that there was someone even stronger. With a heart burning to serve the true Lord, Reprobus began a new search. He now wanted to find Christ. He then met a Christian hermit who announced to him the true faith. This man explained to Reprobus the teachings of Jesus Christ and instructed him on how to live according to the commandments of the gospel. To follow Christ, the hermit said, it was necessary to fast and pray. Reprobus, however, said he was not prepared to fast or to pray long prayers. Still, he insisted that he wished to serve Christ in some way. The hermit, inspired by the Holy Spirit, then suggested a service Reprobus could perform, helping people cross a dangerous and turbulent river where many perished when trying to cross. Because of his strength, he could carry people on his shoulders and save them. Accepting the mission with joy, Reprobus built a hut on the riverbank and began to live there, serving others as a form of worship to God. Day and night he helped travelers and the poor to cross the river, bearing the weight of children, the elderly, merchants, and pilgrims. It was exhausting work, but he did it with faith and dedication. One night, while resting, he heard a child's voice calling him from outside. Going out, he found a small child asking for help to cross the river. Without hesitation, he placed the child on his shoulders and began the crossing, as he had done so many times before. But on that occasion, something extraordinary happened. The child became heavier with every step. The river seemed more violent than ever, and Reprobus fought against the waters with all his strength. The child weighed as much as the whole world, and he could barely move forward. Exhausted and gasping, he looked at the boy and asked why he was so heavy. The child's answer was a heavenly revelation. You have carried not only the world, but the Creator of the world on your shoulders. The child revealed himself as Christ himself and said to Reprobus, "From today on, you shall be called Christopher," which means the one who carries Christ. Then he disappeared before his eyes. Deeply touched by this divine experience, Christopher understood that he now truly served the King of Kings, and his heart was filled with faith and joy. After this mystical encounter, Saint Christopher was baptized and received formation in the Christian faith. His old name, Reprobus, was left behind, and he became known to all as Christopher. His fame for holiness began to spread, and many sought his help not only to cross the river, but also to receive counsel and blessings. Miracles began to occur through his intercession. The blind recovered sight, the sick were healed, and tormented people found peace. Day by day, St. Christopher became more respected as a servant of God and a defender of the Christian faith, even in times of persecution and constant threat against the disciples of Christ. The presence of St. Christopher disturbed the Roman authorities, who saw in the growth of the Christian faith a risk to the unity of the empire and the worship of pagan gods. Since Christopher refused to worship idols and publicly preached faith in Jesus Christ, he was arrested and brought before the Roman governor. During his trial, St. Christopher was pressured to renounce his faith. Riches, women, and even positions in the empire were offered to him if he would return to the worship of pagan gods. But he refused all temptations, firmly stating that nothing would separate him from the love of Christ, whom he had carried on his shoulders. Angry at his resistance, the governor ordered that Christopher be tortured. He was scourged, burned with torches, and thrown into cauldrons of boiling oil, but nothing seemed to shake his faith or cause him mortal harm. With each trial, his trust in God grew, and many who witnessed the tortures converted upon seeing the strength of that man. According to ancient accounts, among those converted was a woman named Nicaea, who admired Christopher's faith and declared herself a Christian publicly. For this, she was also arrested and martyred. Christopher's courage inflamed hearts and awakened faith in many. Tired of trying to make him renounce the faith, the executioners resorted to decapitation. St. Christopher, with peace in his heart, handed himself into the hands of God and was martyred for love of Christ. His blood watered the earth as seed for new Christians, and his memory has been honored by the whole Church ever since. The fame of St. Christopher spread rapidly throughout the Christian world. Churches were built in his honor, and he came to be invoked as a protector against dangers and diseases. His image, usually portrayed with the child Jesus on his shoulders, became a symbol of faith, strength, and fidelity to God. As the centuries passed, St. Christopher came to be especially venerated as the patron of travelers. The story of his crossing the river with the child Jesus inspired the faithful to ask his intercession before journeys, pilgrimages, or dangerous trips. In both East and West, his memory was celebrated with feasts and processions. In many regions of Europe, his image was placed on roads, at city gates, or on walls as a sign of protection against the dangers of the way. Devotion to St. Christopher also extended to drivers with the advance of modernity. He came to be considered the patron of motorists, and many cars bear medals or images of the saint as spiritual protection on the roads. His testimony remains current, reminding us that true strength lies not only in muscles or appearance, but in a heart full of faith and a willingness to serve God above all. St. Christopher is an example of humility, obedience, and courage. The name Christopher, that is, the one who carries Christ, is not merely a title but a mission that every Christian is called to assume. To bring Jesus to others with one's own life's testimony, to bear daily crosses with love, and to help one's neighbor in their needs. The Church recognizes St. Christopher as a martyr of the faith, and his cult is ancient, being liturgically celebrated on July 25th in many countries. Even with few precise historical records, his story remains alive in the hearts of the faithful for its symbolic and spiritual richness. After his heroic death for the faith, St. Christopher came to be venerated as one of the most popular martyrs of the Church, especially in the Christian East. His story gained strength in Byzantine traditions, where he was considered a true giant of faith, someone who, with simplicity, fulfilled the mission of serving Christ with his whole body and soul. With the expansion of Christianity throughout the Roman Empire, especially after the Edict of Milan in 313, devotion to Saint Christopher spread rapidly. Churches began to arise dedicated to his name, and his story was told as an example of fidelity and inner strength in the face of persecution and suffering. During the Middle Ages, the cult of Saint Christopher intensified even more. He became known as one of the 14 Holy Helpers, a group of 14 very popular saints in Europe, invoked especially in times of plague, war, famine, and travel. His intercession was considered powerful against physical and spiritual evils. In many medieval cathedrals and monasteries, his image was painted in large dimensions, especially at church entrances, with the intention of protecting all who passed through. It was said that merely looking at an image of St. Christopher in the morning was enough to ensure one would not die that day without receiving the sacraments. This popular belief strengthened the diffusion of his image on the external walls of churches, castles, towers, and even common houses. Christopher was seen as a kind of spiritual sentry who watched over and protected the faithful throughout the day. The tradition was especially strong in Germany, France, Italy, and Spain. The iconography of Saint Christopher is among the most distinctive of the saints. He is depicted as a very tall and strong man with a beard, usually crossing a river with a staff, and the child Jesus on his shoulders. In some images, the staff is blossoming, a symbol that his mission was blessed by God. The blossoming staff is one of the most beautiful symbolic elements of this story. Just as Aaron's rod blossomed in the Old Testament, indicating that God had chosen him, so too does St. Christopher's staff blossom in the legends to indicate that his mission was holy, despite being humble and hidden. The presence of the child Jesus on his shoulders reveals the theological truth that in serving others, we serve Christ himself. This image touched the hearts of medieval Christians deeply, who saw in the saint a practical example of Jesus' teaching. Whoever welcomes one of these little ones in my name welcomes me. Over time, the name of Saint Christopher became synonymous with protection on the roads. Pilgrims carried medals with his image, and inns kept paintings of the saint as a way of attracting devout travelers. Faith in the protective power of his intercession was practically universal. By the 15th century, Saint Christopher was already the official patron of travelers, boatmen, pilgrims, knights, and later, with advancing technologies, of drivers and pilots. His figure accompanied the evolution of means of transport and remained a reference of support along life's paths. Many accounts of miracles attributed to Saint Christopher arose over the centuries. Stories of people saved from drownings, accidents, sudden illnesses, or attacks during travels, always after praying for his intercession, reinforced the popular devotion consecrated to him. During the Crusades, warriors carried medals and images of Saint Christopher to ensure protection in battles and crossings. He was seen as the ideal spiritual companion for those who faced constant dangers and long journeys in foreign lands. In times of plague and mysterious diseases, it was common to turn to the 14 holy helpers, among whom Saint Christopher occupied a prominent place. His name was invoked against sudden infections, deadly fevers, and sudden accidents, especially with children. Devotion to Saint Christopher also arrived in the Americas with European missionaries. In the Spanish and Portuguese colonies, he came to be worshipped as one of the most powerful saints to protect those traveling through the forests, rivers, and dangerous paths of the New World. In Brazil, several cities and parishes were founded under the invocation of Saint Christopher. The most famous of them is São Cristóvão in Sergipe, one of the oldest cities in the country, founded in the 16th century. The saint is celebrated with religious and cultural festivals of great expression. In many Brazilian localities, especially inland, it is tradition to bless vehicles and drivers on St. Christopher's Day, July 25th. Motorized processions, open-air masses, and collective blessings are held as a way to renew trust in divine protection along the roads of life. Devotion to St. Christopher is not merely symbolic, but profoundly catechetical. He teaches us that every act of charity, no matter how simple it may seem, can become a bridge between heaven and earth. His story reveals that holiness can be born from concrete acts of love for one's neighbor. Even with technological advances, the figure of St. Christopher remains current. In a world where people live in constant motion, traveling, moving, risking themselves on roads, his intercession is a reminder that God cares for his children at every moment. The Church has always recognized the value of the cult of the saints as a means of strengthening the faith of the faithful and bringing them closer to Christ. St. Christopher, like all the saints, points to the Lord and reminds us that it is possible to live heroically even in the most ordinary tasks of daily life. In catechesis, the story of St. Christopher is used to teach children and young people the value of serving others. The fact that such a strong man put his strength at God's service shows that all gifts, including physical ones, must be used for good. In times of existential crises, St. Christopher invites us to carry Christ with courage and perseverance. He did not seek human glory, but was glorified by God for his humility and fidelity. This challenges us not to seek recognition, but holiness. Popular devotion has always found a powerful friend in St. Christopher. His devotees pray with confidence, not only for protection on the roads, but also to face the turbulent rivers of life, difficulties, losses, uncertainties, and everyday dangers. Moreover, the story of St. Christopher is a bridge between the gospel and concrete life. It shows that God reveals himself in unexpected encounters, risky crossings, simple requests such as that of a child asking for help. Faith becomes alive in these moments. The Church continues to celebrate his liturgical memory as a sign of gratitude to a saint who, even wrapped in pious legends, deeply touches the Christian soul. More than a legendary figure, St. Christopher is an expression of the evangelical truth, lived with love and strength. The spirituality of St. Christopher is deeply rooted in service to others. He shows us that holiness is not limited to retreats or celestial visions, but can be lived in the sweat of daily life, in generosity toward others, and in the silent effort to love with concrete gestures. When Christopher carries the child Jesus on his shoulders, he is not merely crossing a physical river, but symbolically bridging the gap between pagan life and Christian grace. This crossing also represents each Christian's path, leaving selfishness behind and carrying Christ with courage and surrender. The physical strength that St. Christopher possessed was put at the service of love. This reveals a spiritual truth. Everything we are, gifts, talents, abilities, must be offered to God. There is no human gift that cannot be sanctified when used for another's good. Humility is another striking aspect of his life. Even being a giant and feared man, he lowered himself to serve the weakest and neediest. He did not seek glory or honor, but only to please God. This silent humility is one of the greatest marks of true holiness. The image of St. Christopher crossing the river with the child Jesus has become a universal icon of the spirituality of service. He teaches us that behind every human face is the face of Christ. Serving others is indeed serving God himself. In times of great vanity and body cult, Christopher's story teaches us that true beauty lies in the soul that loves. His strong body became a sanctuary of the Holy Spirit because he allowed himself to be transformed by faith, renouncing pride and sin. Saint Christopher also teaches us about perseverance. He crossed the river countless times in every season with fatigue, hunger, and cold, but he did not give up. How many of us give up at the first obstacle? The saint's example inspires us to continue even when everything seems difficult. His mission was silent, hidden, without an audience or applause. Yet it was precisely in that anonymous service that God manifested himself. This is a powerful lesson. Often God acts in the backstage of our life, and the simplest gestures are those that most touch the divine heart. The encounter with Christ was not theoretical or philosophical, but concrete. He experienced the real presence of Jesus through service. This shows that the Christian faith is not an abstract idea, but a living and transforming experience that manifests itself in human relationships and charity. The cross Christopher carried was not of wood. It was Christ himself on his shoulders. This recalls Jesus' words, "If anyone wants to follow me, let him take up his cross and follow me." The crossing of that river also symbolizes our own journey with the daily cross. His story is an exhortation to responsibility. He assumed a mission that saved lives and fulfilled it faithfully. Today, we are invited to reflect. Have we used our strength to build up or to destroy? Have we welcomed others or turned away from those who suffer? In times of loneliness, St. Christopher reminds us that God manifests himself in encounters. That child who seemed fragile was, in fact, the Savior of the world. The same applies to our life. In the simplest situations, Christ can reveal himself with power and tenderness. The image of the rushing river is rich in symbolism. It represents life's dangers, trials, temptations, and doubts. And St. Christopher shows us that it is possible to cross this river firmly, as long as we trust in God and are willing to help others as well. The staff that blossomed in his hands is a sign that God transforms what we touch with faith. The world's dryness is overcome by divine grace when a sincere heart decides to serve. Each act of love makes hope sprout where there was despair. St. Christopher is the ideal patron for those who live everyday life with effort: drivers, laborers, conductors, truckers, travelers, anonymous workers. He shows us that the path of holiness often passes through life's common roads. What makes Christopher so special is not only his strength or courage, but his docility to God's voice. He sought the Lord sincerely, went through disappointments, left error behind, and found the true meaning of life. This sincere search is a path to salvation. There are no direct written records from the time St. Christopher lived, but the Church's tradition lovingly preserves the memory of his witness. This reinforces that holiness does not depend on fame, but on silent fidelity to God's love. Christopher is also an example of conversion. He went from a pagan man to a convinced Christian. This gives us hope that no one is too far for God. Our past does not matter. What matters is the decision to start anew and walk with Christ. He is a universal saint. His devotion crosses cultural, linguistic, and geographical boundaries. In every part of the world, St. Christopher is invoked with confidence, and his giant figure with the child Jesus moves children and adults with equal intensity. In times of individualism, St. Christopher inspires us to self-giving. He did not think of himself but of others. His mission was the neighbor. This invites us to rediscover the beauty of living for others, even if there is no recognition or reward. In the Eastern tradition, there are accounts that portray St. Christopher as someone of different, sometimes even monstrous appearance, but who was transformed by faith. This underscores the power of God's grace to change us, regardless of our origin or appearance. His strong and serene image inspires confidence. He reminds us that it is possible to be firm and gentle at the same time, courageous and charitable, imposing and humble. This combination is rare, but profoundly Christian, to be strong to protect, yet with a heart full of tenderness. In modern times, many people still carry St. Christopher medals in their cars or wallets. This is not superstition, but an expression of faith. It is a way of saying, I trust that God is with me on every path, and I want to carry Christ with me wherever I go. His life is an invitation to set aside selfishness and embrace service. Every person we meet is a chance to serve Jesus. If we look at others with eyes of faith, we will see in them Christ himself, asking for our help to cross the rivers of existence. We live in an era marked by constant movements, changes, and uncertainties. Never has there been so much travel. Never has life moved so fast. And it is precisely in this modern scenario that St. Christopher proves profoundly relevant as a powerful intercessor for those who face the world's roads. In the chaotic traffic of big cities, on long journeys along dangerous highways, or even in simple daily commutes, many Christians turn to St. Christopher's protection. He is seen as the one who guides, accompanies, and protects against visible and invisible dangers. But the road is not only physical. Many are undergoing inner crossings, health problems, family crises, losses, doubts, depression. St. Christopher, the saint of crossings, is also a model of hope for those trying to reach the other shore of life with faith. In a world where strength is often used to dominate, St. Christopher's testimony reminds us that true strength must serve to protect, welcome, and carry the frailest. He teaches us that to be strong is to carry others, not to oppress. In times of misinformation and noise, St. Christopher is also an example of discernment. He was not satisfied to serve any power. He sought the greatest, the true one. This sincere search, which led him to Christ, should inspire today's Christians to seek the truth with an open heart. Young people especially can draw inspiration from St. Christopher. He was a strong, determined, restless man who would not settle for mediocrity. He was courageous enough to leave error behind and choose good, even if it cost him his life. Such boldness is profoundly evangelizing. His life also invites us to look with more care at simple and anonymous services. The Church is sustained by millions of people who, like Christopher, live their faith silently, doing good without expecting applause. Each one, in their own way, also carries Christ. Parishes dedicated to St. Christopher continue to flourish worldwide. They are centers of living faith where people find consolation and strength to keep walking. In them, the saint continues his mission of carrying souls to Christ. At feasts in his honor, especially in Brazil, one can see faith expressed in a festive and devout manner. The blessing of drivers, processions with vehicles, rosaries, and open-air masses are signs that tradition remains alive, nourishing the people's faith. Popular devotion is a treasure of the Church, and St. Christopher is part of this living heritage. He shows that God also speaks through the simplicity of the people who recognize in the saints true friends, intercessors, and models of Christian life. The saint also challenges us about our responsibility in traffic. If he is the patron of drivers, then we must reflect on how we drive, how we treat others on the road, whether we respect life and the laws, whether we are prudent. Faith and ethics go hand in hand. His image in cars or keychains is not an amulet but a reminder. Carry Christ with you wherever you go. May every journey, no matter how short, be made with prayer, with a spirit of gratitude and with the desire to arrive at the destination in peace, in body and soul. St. Christopher is also patron of many extreme sports and risky activities. Mountaineers, adventurers, pilots, divers, and extreme travelers turn to him asking for protection. His figure adapts to new times without losing the core of his mission, to protect and guide. In times of pandemic, war, and natural tragedies, many people have once again sought refuge in the intercession of the saints. St. Christopher, who faced suffering and persecution, is someone who understands pain and intercedes with compassion for those who suffer today. There are also those who, spiritually, are on the verge of drowning, drowned in debts, anguish, sins, depression. For them, St. Christopher appears as one who extends a strong arm and helps them cross the river, leading them to encounter Christ. In Christian homes, devotion to the saint can be nurtured with family prayers, blessings of vehicles, readings of his life and witness. Teaching children from an early age to ask for the saint's intercession is an effective way to plant seeds of lasting faith. The Church, mother and teacher, values the saints as mirrors of the gospel. St. Christopher is a mirror reflecting the strength of service, the greatness of humility, the courage of conversion, and the beauty of fidelity. He reminds us that there is no true faith without charity. Over the centuries, he has also inspired various congregations, confraternities, and religious orders. There are religious who have adopted his name and spirituality as the basis for works of charity, especially in welcoming travelers and migrants. St. Christopher also makes us think of migrants and refugees who cross borders with their families in search of peace and dignity. He, who carried others across a river, is protector of those who cross seas and deserts to survive. The gesture of carrying someone on one's shoulders has deep symbolism. It is loving to the limit, offering oneself as a bridge, sharing another's burden. This gesture is updated every time we help a brother carry his own cross. In a world wounded by individualism and haste, the figure of St. Christopher calls us to pause, empathy, and self-giving. He teaches us that haste kills, but love saves, and that every brother is a chance to carry Christ in our lives. The saints are not of the past. They are living presence. They intercede, inspire, walk with us. St. Christopher is a silent, faithful, firm journey companion. He leads us through the turbulent waters of the world and points us to the safe harbor, Jesus Christ. May every Christian, when looking at an image of St. Christopher, feel encouraged to be a Christopher as well, someone who brings Christ to others, who serves without complaint, who uses his strength for good, who walks beside those most in need. At the end of this series on St. Christopher, we can only thank God for giving us such living examples of holiness. May his story continue to be told, prayed, and lived, and may, following his example, we also be bearers of Christ's light wherever we are. St. Christopher, glorious martyr, intercede for us in our journeys. Protect travelers, strengthen the weak, support those who suffer, and help us to carry Christ with love and faith in our lives until we reach the end of our crossing. Amen.